Hey, I'm Chris. I live in Las Vegas and I'm a magical practitioner. And today I want to talk about books of shadows. And I would wish I could say I wanted to do a book review of the Halliwell Book of Shadows, but this is more or less another episode of Witch Use. Now, witch use are issues that I've seen in the witch community that really get underneath my skin. So, this one is about books of shadows and the idea that this is some ancient Wiccan tradition. Now, the idea of books of magic go back all the way back to the when writing began. If we look into archaeology and anthropology, we can look into the ways that people lived centuries ago, thousands of years ago, and we have in recorded history different techniques of magical practices that were done all the way back to ancient Egypt, all the way back to ancient Greece. We have magical techniques that go back into the Roman era and the medieval era. We have all of this written down in recorded history. Now, in the medieval era, there were magical books that were passed about. They weren't called books of shadows, they were called grimoires. The same with medieval Europe, and in the Enlightenment, there were still people who were practicing old magic because old manuscripts were found and were retranslated, and that is why we had a lot of ancient traditions come up in European culture and history. Now, I seem to remember in the Victorian era, the idea of archaeology and anthropology were first coming onto the scene, and that's when a lot of ancient manuscripts were retranslated. There was a big resurgence in the belief of the supernatural and spiritism, and that's the whole idea of Western world practicing ancient Eastern philosophies, such as Madame Blavatsky. She believed she was she was a Victorian age con artist who would study the ancient rituals, kind of appropriate them, and try to westernize them in order to cash in on this whole spirituality kick that was going on back into the Victorian era. So, with Spiritism, with the idea of theosophy, that led into the 20th century. And then we have people like Gerald Gardner write his interpretations or interpolations of magical ritual, especially those that were being practiced in Europe over the last 1,000 years. So that's when the birth of Wicca came out, and that's when the whole idea of the Book of Shadows came out. Now, the whole idea of the Book of Shadows is a 20th century invention. It's not like this is an ancient idea to where witches in Europe were all practicing the same idea. This is a 20th century idea that is now spilled over into the 21st century. So you could say it's a brand new tradition. Again, magic books of themselves are not new. They were just diaries. They were not called books of shadows. They were called grimoires. They were called magical diaries. They were just documentation is what was happening in those magical practitioners' times. Now, again, the only reason I bring this up, and the only reason this is a witch use that I see, is because there's a lot of gatekeeping. There is a lot of people who believe that their practice is more important than other people's practices. And they would say that this was something that was handed down in my family through several generations of witches, when several generations can honestly be just 60 years into the past. Because if you have a baby every 20 years, that's 3 different generations. This is a modern day construct, and gatekeeping on a modern day construct, saying that nobody can take my tradition away from me, that was just invented 100 years ago, is kind of ridiculous and is not a practice of the wise. Again, I'm Chris. I'm a magical practitioner, and blessed be.